As we get into our study of the scientific revolution, I want to give you a brief run-over of what we're going to study during the first unit. In the first unit, as the outline said, we'll cover two questions. The first question is the question of where are we, and we'll take about 4 or 5 weeks on that. And the second question is the question of who are we, and likewise we'll take 4 or 5 weeks on that. The first question of where are we is really about this sense of, well, as our understanding of where the Earth is in the universe changed, how did that affect how we saw ourselves? What were the effects on, the human mind and just society's understanding of what it all means, I suppose. So let's go backwards a little bit and understand where they were coming from first. During this time period, and remember, the 4 revolutions that we study all sort of overlap each other. We're looking at a time period from roughly the mid-1500s to, about the early 1900s, or, maybe around the time of World War I and II. So, at the beginning of that time period, what was ascribed to was what's called the geocentric model. And you can see here from the word, geo means, earth or rock. And then centric means centered. So it's an Earth-centered model. This is also known as the Ptolemaic model, after a guy, Ptolemies, who was the Greek guy who came up with it. This had been the model that people saw the Earth as, and again, understand this is thousands of years ago. Well, what do you have to do except walk outside and look around and see what's going on at night, right? So their understanding of how the Earth moved and how the stars and sun and moon and planets, they could see, I think, 4 or 5 of the planets at the time are visible to the naked eye. Anyway, their understanding of all that, is very much just based on observation. I mean, what else could they do? It's not until later that telescopes became prevalent, as a tool in astronomy. Anyway, so the geocentric model, basically it's this idea that the Earth is at the center, and going out from and is stationary, it's not moving, and going out from the Earth, there are these different layers in which different heavenly bodies, as they would call them, exist. The different layers accounted for the different speeds of rotation, the different speeds at which things rotated around the Earth. Keep in mind too, when you look up at the sky, things tend to be circular, right? I mean, the moon's a circle, the sun's a circle, stars tend to be a little dot. So, this idea of rings or circles, it makes sense with what you can observe elsewhere. Anyway, so there are many layers, the Earth's at the center, and each layer spun at its own rate, so the moon was on one, the sun was on one, the stars and different stars and planets were on different ones, comets, meteors, things like that. All these things that were observable, they were all on their own layer. Now, that might seem like a somewhat silly idea, and I think sometimes, looking backwards, we get a little bit arrogant, and we think, oh, they're so silly, they're so dumb, how could they think that? Well, again, I think we need to justify it a little bit. A lot of it makes sense. As I've already said, when you look, it looks as if the sun starts here and it, over the course of the day, goes over there. In fact, it would be a pretty crazy idea for someone to say, well, actually it's here and we're rotating. That's a pretty crazy idea. It certainly is not what looks like is happening. Okay? So it makes sense visually, and yeah, I mean, so what? I mean, they're still wrong. But it fit with how they understood the world at the time. If you think about it, it's kind of like, I like to make the metaphor of a kid, a baby, an infant. A baby, every person that comes into contact with that baby, to the baby's mind, I don't know how much a baby is thinking, but to the baby's mind, it must seem as if it's the most important thing in the world, right? I mean, a baby, it can't see very far, it doesn't know too far outside of its crib or its room or its immediate family. But everybody that comes into contact with that baby oohs and ahs over the baby, wants to look at the baby, wants to talk about the baby. Even as it grows, as you're a toddler, if you're a little 3-year-old stumbling around or whatever, Every person you run into is fascinated with you. And that kind of mindset, obviously we grow out of that. I can't imagine we're there anymore. We grow out of that and we understand, well, no, actually we're just a single individual and there's many individuals and, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the mindset that Europeans were in at the time. To their understanding, they were the most important thing on earth. Religiously, it fit with what they were being told, right? The church had told them that humans were, God's creation on earth and had been put on earth for a certain purpose, etc. Again, it does sort of fit with, well, as a human, it's pretty easy to, make animals do what you want or whatever. And again, humans do some amazing things, so it's pretty easy to get very impressed with ourselves. So it fit with the understanding of the time. However, a lot of those understandings had been challenged. So the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment, each in their own way, had begun to sort of chip away at this idea that humans were this most important thing out there. The Reformation, it had challenged this idea that the church was right about everything. The Enlightenment had challenged this idea, where kings got their power because God had given them power. So all this was sort of just kind of making people stop and question, well, are we really the center of everything? Maybe we're not. So they started to ask these questions, and then a big part of it obviously was, well, the Ptolemaic theory has all sorts of holes in it. It just doesn't work that well. So the effects of the Copernican or Newtonian Revolution. Copernicus is the guy who kind of gets the ball rolling, and then there's several guys in between, and Isaac Newton, he ends up really writing about it in such a way that it's undeniable that the Earth is not the center, that we rotate or revolve around the sun, etc. Anyway, the effects of this, again, we have this question of, well, if we're not the center of the universe, if everything doesn't revolve around us, what does it all mean? Are there other people out there? Are there other forms of life out there, intelligent life? Are they smarter than us? Or, it brings up all these ideas that people really didn't have before. A second effect is that this really brought out open conflict with the Roman Catholic Church. It's not that, well, okay, let's back up. So the Roman Catholic Church had in fact adopted the geocentric model. They had said, this is how it works. So when they're wrong about that, well, lots of times people aren't very good about being wrong about something. They don't like to be challenged. So they were wrong about that. They stuck to their guns. Some of the early guys that will study, they had to actually recant. They had to take back what they had said, otherwise they'd be excommunicated. And more importantly than just that it was conflict with the Roman Catholic Church, again, it was just one more challenge to the Church's authority. And overall, that's really what we're studying. Not challenging this Church's authority, but what we're studying is, where do humans get their knowledge today? When we look at what we know today, where does it come from? And again, 500 years ago, most of that came from the Church. Today, I don't think that is true. So, you're going to watch a movie called The Story of Science. As you watch that, there's a worksheet that you guys should fill out. I suggest that you stop every now and again and talk with each other about what you're seeing. I think to try to fill out that worksheet just from your memory after you've watched it, probably isn't a great way to do that. So as you watch it, pause it every now and again and just kind of talk about what you're seeing and enjoy the movie.